You can access the entire episode now on our website, forbiddenknowledge.news, Rokfin, Rumble, and all podcast platforms. What we were interacting with as far as what we were calling gods, these intelligences that seem to exist beyond what we can physically perceive, that were written about throughout historical spiritual texts. Do you believe that these were flesh and blood beings or some sort of etheric intelligences that we communicated with through altered states of some kind?
I want to say this. One thing that I want to clarify just real quick about the demiurge. The demiurge takes on an either ignorant or willfully malicious sort of character, actually in late Platonism. So it's the Middle Platonism. It's the Middle Platonists that actually start to talk about the demiurge. Like, wait a minute, things here have to eat other things. They have to consume consciousness to stay alive and end the life of something else. So, and hey, you know what else? If I'm left in nature with only what nature provides, I'm kind of fucked, So they start thinking about this stuff where it's like, we think of it differently because it's like we go to parks and we go on retreats and we go fishing and we go, skiing, and it's like nice. We get to come home and we've got boots on the whole time. When in reality, if you are naked and alone in nature, the way nature renders you, you will be forced to amplify and obey the lower parts of yourself because you are subject to necessity, survival, and often brutish acts. So it's really everything else that we have built using the higher part of our consciousness, what the philosophers would have called the part, our nous, the more divine part of our rational faculties, to pull us up out of that state. And so they said, okay, for something to have created that for us, can't be great. Now, on the other hand, do I think that these things are things of flesh and blood, or do I think they're kind of interdimensional? I think they're interdimensional intelligences. I have interacted with things of this caliber for many years now, and I'll tell you one thing right now: you don't have to be in an altered state. In fact, there are many, many people who aren't in altered states. When you're at that level of sensitivity, that level of being plugged in, sometimes as a defense mechanism, you have to try in some way to shut it down. That could be drugs, that could be alcohol, that could be a total rejection of that perception, which is kind of like cutting off a limb, or at least tying a tourniquet around it so that you can't feel it anymore. These things are communicating with us regularly. As a matter of fact, I want to point out two ideas. Mainly, I want to talk about the agathodaimon and the kakodaimon of Neoplatonism, right? So the daimon, that's where we get our word demon from. But that's not the original connotation. The daimon was related to splitting something in half. It kind of meant like this tutelary guide, this psychopomp, into incarnation and out of it. And so these were one of the beings, right? I mean, because if you look at Gnosticism and Hermeticism and Neoplatonism, they used the same term for this thing. It wasn't even like it wasn't even like they were borrowing words because everybody spoke and wrote in Greek to explain something slightly different. They were talking about the exact same thing with the exact same word. And which is fascinating because this was the science of their day. This was as commonly accepted throughout as we would, our idea of let's say germ theory or molecular biology. To them, it was that level of fact. And so you've got this idea of the agathodaimon, the good daimon, the guide of good counsel. And you have this idea of the kakodaimon, the bad guy, the bad daimon, or the daimon of really destructive counsel. And so you see that kind of like devil and angel on a shoulder is way older than Christianity, that idea of forces that try and pull you up and forces that try and pull you down. As Plotinus would say, further into highly, into matter, until the soul is completely stuck and eventually dissolves. So you've got, what you have here is then, just to jump forward in time, because I think it's a really, really incredible way of putting it. You have Martinez de Pasquale, who in the 1700s was a French, or he was living in France, but he was a Freemason who kind of developed his own, or came into possession of this quasi-Gnostic. He called it Catholic, but of course it wasn't Orthodox Catholicism, but it was this quasi-Gnostic revelation of the the creation of the world, and he wrote the treatise on the reintegrations of, well, it's from his notes, and after he died his students brought them together, and his philosophy is summed up in a work called the Treatise on the Reintegration of Beings. And he basically says that the fall of man, the fall of Adam, rendered him a thinking creature, which is to say, his thoughts are not his own from here on out, because he was made to obey the will of God. And so he has his only true will in the material is which he chooses. He's not thinking his own thoughts. Every thought is either an angel or a demon. And in Greek, that was the agathodaimon or the kakodaimon. They were doing the same things. And then you chose which impulse to act on. So I tend to view these spiritual entities as having this role continually. It's not as fringe as you would think. When you become conversant in this language, in these literatures, even within, capital O Orthodox Church, this is the belief, that you've got a savior or a guardian angel or the Christ that is constantly giving you your good thoughts, talking to you, appealing to you. And then you've got everything else. You're literally swimming in forces that are attempting to dissolve you or use your physical experience to their own ends. And so essentially life at that point just becomes spiritual warfare. And so this is technically my belief. It might seem crazy to people, but I've been doing this long enough, and I'm not somebody, I'm sure you can tell, who will completely bend to credulity and fear. So I've tested these things, and I always leave myself the wiggle room to say I don't know that I'll believe this in 10 years, but this, for the most part, this is my belief on the nature of these entities.
How far do you think we can go with this concept that our thoughts are not our own? Do you think that everything is just out in the ether and we just connect to it with our consciousness antenna and bring it in, that it's really not coming from ourselves?
Well, some of it is poured in, not all of it. We're not reaching for all of it. It's kind of that thing where, to me, how water always goes to low ground? It's the same thing. Everything that exists is some form of intelligent energy. We think intelligence is, a dog doing a cute trick or a human being taking a math test. That's not necessarily the case. That's sophisticated self-awareness. There's a spectrum of consciousness, and energy has it too, because it responds to mind, right? You see things like the double slit experiment. You see things like energy work. It's a truism in esoteric Taoism and Qigong. The mind, the Qi flows, right? That's our own personal energetic field. The Qi flows where the mind goes. So it responds to mind. I'm talking capital M mind. I'm not talking about the brain. I'm talking about an individual consciousness. And everything has these attenuated degrees of response and intelligence, which is recognition, right? Meaning that there is some underlying law or vitality which renders them in relationship to something else. So if you look at even at the molecular level of attraction and repulsion,